So, and even people like Bob Moog, I practically begged him to videotape interview him. And I don't know, we were friends. I could just never get him to do that. Very difficult. People have.
Yeah. Well, finally, he did accept having that
the Moog film.
Yeah. Did you?
I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it and I didn't see it. I didn't look at it. The reason I didn't is this is somewhat painful. Bob died of a brain tumor. I'm not a doctor, but I really feel like he was having advance warning of that at the time he made that film. I never heard Bob wax so poetical and metaphysical about touching instruments and feeling what they were doing. That really just was not like Bob. And it bothered me when I saw that part of the film. And also I was aware, and I talked to Hans about that at Bob's memorial. I tried to interest him in a more general approach to a documentary about electronic instruments and electroacoustic music. And he told me, he says, no, I'm only interested in subcults. That's why I had this interest in Bob Moog. And that's okay. It's fine for a filmmaker to decide what he or she wants to do. I applaud. That's not my interest. The subcult. And what bothered me about the film, I think, was it truly was a subcult. It was kind of techno-oriented. I mean, you really didn't get the sense that there were different cohorts. There was an avant-garde group. There was a fusion group with Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, and, there was certainly a progressive rock group, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Jan Hammer, and people like that were really, to my way of thinking, much more serious musical explorations of the Moog synthesizer than a lot of the techno that got on the Moog film. That was kind of it's what we've heard lately. There was, again, may I say it, the history, the realization that, there have been some really interesting musical thrusts with the Moog synthesizer, that it didn't just come out with these kind of plinky kinds of tunes and stuff like that. And I would ask Bob when I first interviewed him, I asked him about this or that. And sometimes he would only say something like, well, that's what some people can do with it. And you could tell that he didn't particularly, his musical taste ran towards more depth. Bob was a fair musician, actually, and had great ears from tuning oscillators all those years. He and I and a man named Tom Lamb did a number of performances at the Strasbourg Planetarium in Rochester, New York, of planetarium music. What else would you call it if you know about that era? And you know what planetarium music is, And Bob certainly held his own quite well and had a good ear, a good sensibility about music. He appreciated music of all stripes. And you could tell that sometimes it was like, well, it's not what I would have done with a Moog synthesizer. As a matter of fact, there's a virtual version that I felt like had not been handled very well. And I called Bob and I said, how did that lineage go, Bob? And I mean, did they call you and have you do that? Or, oh, no. They pretty much had done it and called me and, to get my blessing and imprimatur to use and so forth. And I said, wow, that's really what I thought. He says, well, it's not what I would have done. And that's Bob's way of saying a lot. I mean, you don't need any more from Bob Moog than that. It's not what I would have done. And I knew in a thrice, right. When I looked at it, I saw so many errors that I thought Bob wouldn't have done that.
What do you think about the revival of the Moog Company?
I think it's good. I mean, it was done under Bob's aegis to begin with. I loved the idea that they made a thing that had basically an analog front end where all the sound was done with digital control, I'd felt for many years that would be a very viable and potent thing. I had even dreamed, and maybe I don't know enough technically to dreamed a reasonable dream. I had dreamed of a vacuum tube Moog synthesizer that was truly warm, because I'd played the Hammond Nova chord, 168 vacuum tubes. Oh, richness beyond belief. All the filters were vacuum tubes. All the envelope generators were vacuum tubes. All the oscillators were vacuum tubes, 168 vacuum tubes. And as Bob said, yeah, it made as good a heater as it did a musical instrument. But, now we have vacuum tubes that are about this big. And there's a revival, of course, and this may come and go. This comment may not be for the ages, but there's a revival right now in 2008 of vacuum tube technology of all kind in audio, especially hi-fi kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of people making, again, because of the characteristic curve, vacuum tubes don't distort the same way transistors do, which Russ Hamm knew, and musicians had been telling engineers, interesting aside, about guitar amps for years. That doesn't sound right. Well, it's the exact same circuit in transistors as it was in tubes. Well, Russ Hamm had to stand up at AES one time, and it's in a paper. It turns out that they distort with different kinds of harmonics, vacuum tubes and transistors. And vacuum tubes are more pleasing to the musician's ear. I have great faith in the artist and in the sensibility of the artist. When the rubber hits the road, we have subjective and an objective world. We have both worlds. I try to know something about both. The technical world, the measurement world, the objective world, what you can do with all of that is important, in my opinion, if you wish to progress in your understanding, especially of equipment and so forth, and be a teacher, certainly. The subjective world is fuzzy. It's hard to get a hold of. It's nasty. It's wet. It's moist. It's dirty, and yet, in the final analysis, it's the important world. Oh, you only perceive it that way. Well, if I only perceive it that way, that's the most important thing about the entire paradigm. How we hear, how we listen, what we like, what moves us, that kind of thing. And certainly, to that extent, I'm an heir of Bob Moog, within the field. A romantic, if you will. Yeah, I think Bob was a romantic. But when I saw that film, it set my teeth on edge. And I knew that the film was not universal in its approach about all the different kinds of music that were made with analog voltage controlled and that kind of stuff. That it was sort of cultish a little bit. So I've never even seen it from beginning to end. And I'm not disparaging the film. I know it's done well. It's quite good to have it.
And did Bob ask you at all about what he was doing when he was starting the business up again?
Oh, no, only superficially. I mean, by that time, I'd see him when he came to Berkeley, and we'd fall on each other and, embrace and so forth, and still good friends. But Bob could be quite hermetic and sort of unaware even. He had done certain things that ex post facto I figured out were pretty important historically and hadn't bothered to tell me. He knew what my interests were, but in his mind, he just didn't have that perspective. The things I fished out of his trash can, literally, at his home in Asheville, North Carolina. I mean, we're like the first brochure that was ever done for a Moog module, and there with a date, a postmark right on the thing. And I'm thinking, good Lord, he's throwing this away. And for him, it was just like, and you can't expect the person doing the developing and all like that to also have the historical perspective. I don't think you can expect that very well. It's just two different heads. He was about doing all this stuff, and I've done things, but also I'm about looking and saying, that's important. People in the future are going to want to know about that. So I've saved a number of artifacts and stuff like that, and I'm happy that there's a place in Canada. I wish it had been the U.S. where people could go and look at a lot of those instruments. Bob pointed out to me, you know, when we were doing the Electronic Arts Foundation, okay, when you get these instruments, so what? I said, well, we'll have them. He says, not long. Why not? He says, you can't keep them up. They're from all different eras of technology. And of course, he was right. Yeah. And then David Keene and I were talking about it. I told David that. I said, no, you got to record this stuff right away. That's the only thing we're going to be able to keep, the recordings. I don't think it's happened. You know, it hasn't happened. And I'm sort of sad about that, because sometimes you only get one chance, you know, to keep a weird instrument going and get the damn thing on a digital audio file. And then at least people know what it sounded like. Because who wants to read a book and hear talk about what something sounds like? I don't.